the thrill of finding something out there in the wild. There's nothing like it. And that chapter in the book where I talk about my good friend Chad, who worked at a bottle exchange, when a guy came in with a garbage bag full of 8 tracks. It spilled open, and that Van Halen 2 was just one of the first ones that came out. And oh, sorry, I was going to throw those out. And he's like, can I have those?
Hi, Tim. Welcome to the Book Down Rock podcast.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for having me. This is great. Thanks for having me on here.
Yeah, well, you just released a brand new book on Kansas that we want to have you back for. That's called Let It Be Your Guide, the Kansas Album Review, free plug. So we'll talk about that next time. So that's out now. But we wanted to cover a few of your recent books that you released. One is this beautifully put together book, Unspooled, an Adventure in 8 Tracks. And then another one we have here, Y&T, Down for the Count. So yeah, we'll do a little split episode deal here. We'll split these up into 2 episodes. Before we get into the books, though, let's find out about yourself, where you're from. Also, I'm interested in your background in radio, because
Sure.
we're both radio guys, and why Bon Jovi and Journey are 2 important band names when it comes to your love of collecting music and 8 tracks.
Yeah, it's all kind of related, but yeah, I'm from a little town in Woodstock, New Brunswick. We're on the Maine border, and born in '74. So I I grew up with I think the best music ever. They always say that the music that you like when you're 14, 15 years old kind of forms a basis for the music you like forever. And when I was 14, I was listening to Bon Jovi and Def Leppard and Van Halen and Whitesnake and Rush, and I've gotten into more 70s stuff since then, but it hasn't changed all that much. And as far as being in radio, my history in radio, that's what I took after high school. I took a radio broadcasting course for 2 years, and I ended up working part-time at my local AM radio station. So this is, really happy. It's exciting. I worked so far back that some of our older songs, we still spun off 45s, and
Cool.
learned all about what carts were. And I talk about that in the Unspooled book. And then, mid 90s, the industry was changing, as you probably know, and I was out of radio for 13 years. And then I came back part-time, same station, now FM, different format. And I ended up getting a job as a copywriter, creative writer, commercial writer, I guess you could say, and with a little bit of on air. And I'm still at it. I don't have any on-air duties anymore, but I'm still working in radio. So yeah, it's been quite a long. You just one of those things, day in, day out. You get up, you go to work, and you realize it's been X amount of years that you've been doing the same thing.
Yeah. And by the way, I think the connection got cut off. Canada, right? You said New Brunswick.
Yeah, definitely.
Canada.
In Canada.
Yeah, because there's a New Brunswick, New Jersey.
New Brunswick's a province. So Woodstock is the. Anybody that's ever heard of the band April Wine, the singer from April Wine, who sadly passed away last year, Miles Goodwin, was born in Woodstock, New Brunswick. He didn't live there, but that's part of the lore his family was passing through. So it's a pretty cool little, tidbit of information. Also, I'm about 7-8 minutes away from Meductic, New Brunswick, which is where the Sabian Cymbal Factory is located. And that's a pretty cool, big deal for such a small part of the world over here. So
yeah, and you had Martin Popoff, a fellow Canadian who wrote the foreword for Unspooled. Martin's been on this podcast many times.
Yes.
He's a prolific author. Great foreword that he writes in that book. I did tell you that when I checked out your YouTube channel, I said, you work in radio? Because you got a radio voice. And you said, yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, I noticed that right away. But Unspooled, an Adventure in 8 Tracks. Let's start with this one. I love this. It came out last summer. 5-star reviews across the board on Amazon. I'm sure you've seen that.
Yeah, it's gratifying. And this is the book where there's a lot to it. And it's kind of I love doing interviews like this because it's kind of a hard book to explain to people. It's not just about 8 tracks.
Right.
It's about music collecting. It's about memorabilia. It's kind of a trip through the 80s. And yeah, you mentioned, Bon Jovi and Journey. Why are they important? Well, Bon Jovi was the band that was responsible for me really just having the collection that you see behind me here and not just being satisfied with recording songs off the radio. I was 12 years old when Slippery When Wet came out, and the first time I heard You Give Love a Bad Name, I'd never heard anything like that on Top 40 radio before, and it blew me away. And not only did I want to know about this band, I wanted to know if there were any other bands out there like this band. And when I started buying their albums, it was, I would read the liner notes and pour through them and find out who produced the album, who engineered the album, who mastered it, who took the photography, what kind of instruments did they play, all that stuff. It soaked in, and I didn't realize it was all that was soaking in. And the collectability started there too, because inside the Slippery When Wet cassette, it said also available, and it had the 2 previous albums. A lot of people thought that was their first album, right? Because it was the first really big one.
Right.
And I said, well, if I like this one, there's no reason I wouldn't like those other 2. So that's where the completist had be started, right there. And Journey's important because they're one of the first sort of rock bands that I ever got into. I've always been a fan, but the first 8-track that I ever bought as a collector was Journey's Escape album. So it all kind of ballooned from there. You never start with an entire collection. It's always piece by piece, right?
I remember going back to the days of cassettes where you could go down that rabbit hole, and I had a part-time job, didn't make much money, but it all went to cassettes. If I could afford 2, I'd get 2, and it would be okay. I'd get into whatever band it was. Like I remember Tom Petty. I just remember, album by album by album, just getting next one. And it's so that's what's missing from nowadays, with the streaming services. It's a different experience. It's that thrill. It's and with 8-tracks too. After reading the book too, you find the Van Halen 2 8-track, and it's somebody just throwing it out. Those are the thrills. And there's also the days of the. I used to love to go to the music conventions where they'd have all the CDs, books, VCR tapes of Kiss in concert from 1977. You're like, holy shit, man. Nowadays YouTube, it's there, but there was a time when before YouTube, that was a find.
It's really hard to explain to someone that didn't grow up with the internet, with YouTube, where everything is just a click away. When you did have enough money to buy a cassette, you listen to that tape, and if you didn't really like it that much, you're like, I'm going to like this. I paid $12 for it. And it just meant everything, and you cherished that music. And if you were fortunate enough to find something that was a little rare, boy, you really thought you were onto something, because it was just, I grew up in a small town. Woodstock's a small town, and I didn't have any older brothers. I didn't have any older cousins to drive me to places. I didn't know where there were any used music stores or anything like that. It was a world that I knew nothing about. So I remember, finding something like, I have the 45, but I don't have the cassette anymore. I wish I did. But when I found the cassette, Bon Jovi Wanted Dead or Alive, it was this little EP that came out that had like an acoustic version of that, had a live version. It was this EP, not a cassette single, but it came like a regular cassette. And I remember, what's this? And I was so excited. I was like, I'm the only one in the world that has this. Well, obviously I wasn't, but it was just, I have such vivid memories of finding those things that are out of the ordinary. And getting into a band that, a good example I always bring up is when I got into Rush, pre-internet, I had no idea how many albums they had. And so every time I went to a record store, it seemed like I saw a Rush album I'd never seen before. So I just have to keep buying them until I didn't see anymore. And it was great. Yes, there was that frustration of not being able to find something. And now you can find stuff online. You can't find everything. There's still things that have evaded me, but the thrill of finding something out there in the wild, there's nothing like it. And that chapter in the book where I talk about my good friend Chad, who worked at a bottle exchange, and when a guy came in with a garbage bag full of 8-tracks, it spilled open, and that Van Halen 2 was just one of the first ones that came out. And oh, sorry, I was going to throw those out. And he's like, can I have those? And it was just, and then he called me up. He said, you're not going to believe this. And he came to the house. He had all these cool, it was hard when we first started collecting these things, it was hard to find good rock ones. You know what I mean?
Right.
And you know, and then couple that, of course, with the main reason I wanted to write this book was when I found out, you know, with the advent of the internet, when I found out that Columbia House, an RCA music service, kept making albums on 8-track longer than the retail did. That blew my mind. I don't know why it blew my mind, but it
Yeah,
did. There was just something about albums from 85 onward on 8-track that, like, this should not be. These should not exist.
yeah.
It's so weird. And of course, back then, I was like, well, I'll never have any of these. And I've done quite well. I found some rare 8-tracks that cost a little bit, some of them. But,
Sure.
you know, it's just one of those things. I love getting as many formats as I can of my favorite bands, my favorite albums. They're just, I like having them on all these different formats. It's just, to me, it's just cool.
Well, for those listening on just audio, because this is on video and audio, just to describe, behind you there is a wall-to-wall cassettes, vinyl, and it looks like, are those Kiss?
Yeah,
Up at the
up
top.
above me, those are the original McFarlane
Yes.
Kiss figures from '96. There's an Alice Cooper one, and I believe there's a Doug McKenzie one.
Yeah.
And over here, there's a wall of CDs. There's more records that you can't see, and people get an idea of just how bad this habit goes. I'll turn this around. Those are my 8-tracks.
There's the, oh, wow, the 8-track collection.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, do you have to eventually think about building an extra room, or how does that all work?
You know what? I've done really well at making the most out of limited space. You know, there may come a time when I may have to, you know, I'm not sure what will happen, but so far I keep managing to find a little bit more space here and a little bit more space there. So
I should have tabbed it, but I'm looking for the Van Halen 2 8-track. It's in here. I'll find it. I'm going to put it up.
Yeah. It's
what page
that's,
is that? I'm trying to find it here.
You will find. I'll see which one of us gets there
in
first.
The 50s, maybe some. Oh, here we go. Yeah, page 55. Let's see if people can see this. This is so cool.
So yeah, I found it too. So
the way it's. Oh, here we go. There we go. Not bad. Yeah. The way this book is laid out, it's just crystal clear pictures of these. So like you could see every little scratch and, you know, where the sticker's peeled. And I mean, it's beautifully put together. Let's talk about that actually. Who's responsible for this great layout?
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about that. It's a very good friend of mine, Matthew Phillips. We've been friends for over 30 years. We actually met when I was taking radio broadcasts and he was taking print journalism. So we were in the same banner of communication arts. So yeah, we got to be buddies. We found out we both liked, this is 93. And if you could find friends that still like Def Leppard and Winger and
in 93, right. That was
was really excited about the Coverdale Page album, friends for life, right? But Matt's a graphic designer by trade. He's a very good one. And he did such a great job on this book. Yeah, the graphics are eye-popping. And, it's just blown away by it. It's a great coffee table book. And that's the thing I like to get through to people. People might say, what do I want a book about collecting 8-tracks? It's not just about that. It's a good-looking book. It's a book about music. It's a book about collecting. What makes us collect things? A lot of us collect something, whether it's Star Wars memorabilia or movie memorabilia or baseball cards or hockey cards, there's something inside of us, some of us, that drives us to, I don't just want one or two of these, I want all of them. And it's the search. It's that endless search. There's always something else that's evading you. And there's a lot of great discussions in there about that. But I also did want to get down as well as I could a definitive list, or as definitive as I could make it, of all of these titles that were released on 8-track through the 1980s, because it's in a day and age where you can Google just about everything. You can't just Google this. You'll get parts, or you won't find what you're looking for. So I wanted something that people could sit down and go, wow, I did not know all of these titles existed on 8-track. And if they're in one of the year-end lists in my book, and I'll explain how those work, but if they're in a year-end list, then it's confirmed to exist. It's not it's not maybe it exists, somebody told me it exists. No, they're confirmed to have been released by the record clubs, Columbia House being the most popular, but there was also RCA, later to become BMG Music Service. They kept making 8-tracks all the way to November 1988, which is a lot later than I think most people would think 8-tracks were around. Most people would say, well, they died out in the late 70s. And that was definitely the peak of their popularity. It was more like around 82 that you really started seeing a decline, and then you just stopped seeing them on store shelves at all. If anything, you'd see them in the dump bins, right? There was no resale value to these things whatsoever. So it's crazy now that there's these titles that people will pay big bucks for. Those tend to be the club cards, the ones that you had to be a member of a club to get it. You couldn't get it in the store.
Full disclosure here, Tim, you might hate my brother for this, but I do remember early 80s. He had Jay Giles Band, Centerfold. Well, wait, what was the what Centerfold?
That'd be Freeze Frame.
Freeze Frame.
Freeze Frame's the album.
He had that, and I think he had a Toto or a Boston album on 8-track, and this is when they're now becoming phased out.
Obsolete. Yeah.
He and his friend took a hammer to it.
Oh yeah. Yep.
And that was basically like symbolic, like, yeah, let's make way for cassettes.
Well,
so, apologies.
It's a funny medium. It really is.
Well, yeah, let's start. What is an 8? For those who may not be aware of what an 8-track is, because I'm old enough to remember this. What exactly is an 8-track? How does it work? And I know from working at radio, it's like a cart machine. You can't rewind.
Yeah, they don't rewind. They're a continuous loop, which means that there are places where they automatically stop. And yeah, the best way and this, there's a picture in here. This is one that I managed to keep from when we still used carts for commercials and for station liners and for certain songs, like certain gold songs.
Station IDs at the top of the hour.
Yeah. So there's a cart. Basically, it's basically an 8-track. The front of it's clear. We're getting a thunderstorm, so if I disappear, that's why. Hopefully not.
Okay.
But yeah, we're starting to get a thunderstorm.
I'm looking behind me. I have my 8-tracks from my radio days here somewhere. I should have been ready. I could pull them out, but yeah, a lot of my old skits that I would do in college radio and stuff.
Yeah, you could, you could record them and you could use them over and over again. You'd use them for a commercial, and then we had this thing in the studio called a bulk eraser, which is this big magnet, and you'd press a button and you turn it over, and that would erase what was on it, sort of. After a while, like if you just played a cart that you hadn't recorded anything on, you'd hear voof, voof, voof. It's like using a cassette tape over and over and over again. Yep. It gets weakened, right? There's less magnetism there. And that's basically what 8-tracks were. They're called 8-tracks, near as I can tell, because they were broken up into 4 stereo tracks. So 4 times 2 is 8. They did not have 2 sides like a record or a cassette. They were broken up into 4 programs. And the programs, they tried to keep the programs as close in length as possible. So if you had a 38-minute album, then each of your programs would be 9 and change. They would try to keep them like that because you couldn't rewind them. Like you said, you could only fast forward. They were very, very strange. And that is why, and that's one of the things that people that do remember 8-tracks remember about them. That is why sometimes the songs would be out of order. And that's also why sometimes a song would get halfway through and fade out. Then it would change to the next program and the song would fade back in.
The benefit was it was to allow people to listen to it in their car, I think was the main.
Was why the whole reason that they were popular is the portability won out. They were really the first truly portable medium. It was very easy to throw a tape deck into your car or your truck, so you could listen to the album you wanted to listen to when you wanted to listen to it. So that's what won out. You were sacrificing a little bit of the sound quality. You were sacrificing oftentimes getting to hear the songs in their intended order. And you were sacrificing the ritual of sitting down and listening to the music while you're looking at the cover art, because the 8-tracks cover art's not only small, half of it would be stuck in the machine while it was playing. And then inevitably what would happen, because you had, unless people took the best of care and they got their head cleaners and they cleaned the machine and they cleaned the tapes, they would have taken a lot of maintenance. And if you didn't do that, eventually what would happen is that the mechanism would slip a little bit, because each of your length of tape was divided up in 4. That was each of your programs. So they would start to blend. So that's why sometimes you'd get what they call crosstalk, and you'd be listening to a song and you'd hear part of another song at the same time, because you're getting the corresponding song. If you're listening to program 1, you might be able to hear what's on program 4 at that same point in the program. Really, really odd format, really strange. And, half the time when I was a kid, I'm old enough to remember my cousins having some of these. I remember, just at the turn of the 80s, I was 5, 6 years old, and I remember them having things like the Cars and Blondie. And I'm pretty sure the first time I ever heard Back in Black was that somebody had an 8-track of it. But I also remember a lot of time spent fishing the tape out of the machine and having to respool them and hoping that it didn't wind up inside there again. They weren't the most reliable. And cassettes started, I think, around the same time 8-tracks did, I think, maybe even a little bit before. But from what I've understood and what I've researched on it, the quality wasn't there, and they weren't as reliable. They got better at making cassettes, so that cassettes eventually overtook 8-tracks as the preferred portable medium. Probably didn't hurt that the Walkman came out in the late 70s. Now all of a sudden, it wasn't just, yes, I can listen to this in my car, but if you were a kid and you had a Walkman, you could go for a walk and listen to your favorite album whenever you wanted. So eventually 8-tracks, just as music formats do, they just eventually phased out. Except Columbia House and RCA Music Service kept making them all the way through, almost through the entire 80s, which that's just a strange concept to me. Even after all this time, even after I've been fortunate to find some of them, it still doesn't make any sense to me that there was a 3 or 4 year period where if you were a member of a record club, you could choose either vinyl, cassette, 8-track, or CD. Like 8-tracks and CDs coexisting. It's just a weird concept, but it happened. And it's part of music history. It's a very small part of music history. It's a very niche part of music history. And I knew that going into it. But I think all music history should be documented. And this wasn't being documented. And to get back to Martin Popoff, I had him on my show. When I first had him on, I wanted to pick his brain about 8-tracks. I didn't even know this was going to be a thing. I just wanted to know what he remembered about seeing them disappear from stores, and what people were doing that had big 8-track collections. Did you automatically switch? What did you do? We got to the end of that. He didn't know anything about the RCOs, the record club only 8-tracks. He didn't know that those existed, the later 80s ones. And when we got to the end of that conversation, he said, someone should write a book on this. And I was thinking, if Martin Popoff thinks that there's a book here, there must be a book here. And I talked to my buddy Matt, and I set about gathering information and writing, and that's the end result is what you see here.
Yeah. And 1981 is that the year that releases appear to have come out on 8-track? Because there's no definitive way to track that down. So, I'm sure you tried.
This is how I broke it down. 1981 appears to be the first year that there were 8-tracks that came out through the record clubs that did not have a retail counterpart. So in 1981, it was still pretty common for most releases to come out on a major label. It would come out on vinyl, it would come out on 8-track, it would come out on cassette. That was just standard process. Then there's reel to reel, but we won't even get, that's a whole other thing. We won't even get into that. Those were also available later than anybody might think. But 1981 appears to be the first year that there were some releases that you could only get through the record clubs. I don't have any way of confirming that. This is just through a lot of trial and error. I really would have loved to have talked to someone who worked for Columbia House or RCA Music Service to pick their brain about that, about the process. Why did they keep making them? Why did they eventually stop? So we start in 81 and we end in 1988, which is the last year that Columbia House or RCA made any titles available on 8-track. And so, yeah, it's pretty much a trip through the 80s, 81 through 88. And at the end of each year's chapter, I've got a list of all known titles to exist on 8-track. And in doing that, you start to see some trends. You start to see when they decrease and there's less and less of them. So, like I said, if it appears in one of these lists, it exists. And like I said, it's the type of thing that most people just shake their head and say, well, why does that even matter? I don't know.
Yeah, it's just fun.
I don't know.
It's a fun.
I don't know. Why does it matter? It's just, why does anybody get intrigued by something? And that was just the thing that I remember distinctly. I talk about this in the book. There's a website called 8trackheaven.com.
Yeah.
It exists today in an archived form, so you can still look at it, but it hasn't been active for a long time.
That's what I was going to say. I tried going there myself, and the link wasn't working.
Oh, so maybe it's completely deactivated now.
Yeah,
because there was just
the number 8trackheaven.com.
Yeah. Okay. So that's something that's changed since the book came out. They finally. Well, that's too bad.
Bummer, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But that was where I learned about these RCOs, these record club only tapes. And there were some pictures. One of the first ones that I saw was George Harrison's album Cloud 9, which came out in 1987. And I thought, that came out on 8-track? That's 1987. This would have been about 95 that I first discovered this. Then I saw a picture of David Lee Roth, See 'Em and Smile. I was like, what? Like, how is this possible? How
86.
is this? There's this whole underground segment, this whole different level of music collecting that I had previously known nothing about. It opened up this world that I didn't know existed. I like most people, I had kind of figured, well, I guess they stopped around 1982.
Yeah,
which they did if you bought them in stores. That's when you stopped seeing them.
How were they making money off of these in the late 80s, right? I mean,
I don't know how these record clubs made money because they had such a weird system to them, but they must have figured that there were enough people out there, and I guess they could corner the market on them by continuing to manufacture them. Now, if you were a country music fan in the 80s and you had a big 8-track collection and you weren't ready to give it up, you didn't have to, because all the major country artists, most of the minor ones, they all kept coming out with their releases on 8-track through these record clubs. With the rock and pop ones, it's really weird. It's hit and miss. There doesn't seem to be any logic for which ones did come out and which ones didn't come out. And I don't know what the distinction is. Mainly I'm concentrating on the bands that I like, and as far up as we know that they came with 8-tracks, but there were just a lot more that were available that manufactured, but probably manufactured in very, very small quantities. You know what I mean? Like I would imagine even for a huge selling album, they wouldn't have made too many of them on 8-track. It would just have been, I don't know. I have no idea. And then some, lesser selling albums, there could be like double-digit printings of them. I don't know. It's very strange.
There's an interesting piece of trivia, 8-track trivia, Cheap Trick. What is the last band to have a number 1 8-track? I love this. Like 10 years ago.
I have a copy of that. I'm happy to report. When they came out with their album, the latest in 2009, they actually put it out on 8-track, and in typical Cheap Trick humor, they said we wanted to have the number 1 selling something the week it came out. Yes. And there's actually quite a long chapter in this book where I talked to Kathy from Kate's Track Shack, which is a great resource for getting your tapes fixed and buying used ones. But there's pictures of her with Rick Nielsen and Tom Peterson, and it's pretty cool. But yeah, that's the anomaly. That's the only one that I have newer than 88. But another one I missed when it came out, and if you miss it, you either don't get it or you end up paying a lot more for it, is when Alice Cooper put out Live at the AstroTurf about 6 years ago, which is when the original band reunited, and they did a set, and that came out on 8-track.
Okay.
Which I'd love to have, but I don't.
Record Store Day, I wonder if they have special 8-track stuff for Record Store Day.
Oh, yeah. No, they do. I think the band Ghost had one. It was a Record Store. I don't know if it was a Record Store Day exclusive or not, but I know they've had an album on 8-track. And it's still very niche, you know what I mean? Because it's not practical. I mean, cassettes are coming back, which I think is cool, but it's a lot easier to find a cassette player and a working cassette player than it ever would be to find a working 8-track
I
player.
was about to say, yeah, it's not like you can play these. They're more just collectible items
You
at this point.
can, but I got to tell you,
Expensive.
expensive, and you have to really put a lot of maintenance into it. A
Yeah.
great resource that I discovered is a Facebook page called 8-Track Fixation, which I also talk about in the book. That's really when I discovered just how many of these albums existed on 8-Track. But there are people that are dedicated to fixing up their players, cleaning the heads, putting new felt pads in their tapes, testing their tapes, taking them apart, respooling them. I admire that dedication, but I just don't have the patience for it. But it
Yeah.
is possible to listen, to these albums on 8-Track. And, I just think that's cool, but I just think they look cool on a shelf. And I love the look on people's faces when they come over and they go,
What is that?
that's on 8-Track?
Yes.
Is this real?
Yeah. What are some of your most prized possession 8-tracks and why? You mentioned the Van Halen 2 one.
Well, I can get a few of them out, but yeah, mostly it's albums and bands that I really, really, really like, and things that are rare, things that you're just not going to come across. Definitely not come across in the wild, but you won't even see it on eBay and Discogs. I've added many a title to Discogs that weren't there before on 8-Track. But yeah, well, okay. So you mentioned Van Halen 2. That's not a particularly rare one because that was such a big album and that was 79. But how many people have this on 8-Track?
Oh, 5150.
Yeah.
The album that got me into Van Halen. That's listening to it on cassette on a Walkman, Christmas Eve, 1988. That's
so
cool.
yeah, that's
8-track.
I definitely wanted to have all the Van Halen, but not only that, related is
Oh yeah, Sammy's solo album
from 87.
From 87, in between 5150 and OU 812. Now, so it's just called. Does it say, because there are two different titles for that one? They had the MTV contest.
No, it's just self-titled. I don't have any of the copies that say I Never Said Goodbye. I think it got reissued about 92. So yeah, that was a fairly recent acquisition. But I also have, this is one more I want to show you. One of the two that came out on November 15th, 1988.
Okay. November 15, 1988. Oh, Journey's Greatest Hits. Yeah.
Yep. 1988.
Wow.
On 8-Track.
That is cool.
So, yeah. And it's, I don't know. It's just it's still mind blowing to me. You know what I mean? That number one, they exist. And so I'm not just collecting 8-Tracks for the sake of collecting 8-Tracks. I have to like the albums. So.
Right. Okay. What was
Those
the
are some
first
of my
one
prized
ever,
possessions? Right,
what was the very first 8-track you ever got?
Well, when I was 5 years old, so this would have been 1979 for Christmas, I got the Muppet movie soundtrack on 8-Track. And we didn't even have an 8-Track player in my house, so I had to go to my grandparents to listen to it. But the first one that I ever bought was in 1990, and it was Journey's Escape. I bought that for $1 at a flea market.
$1. Wow.
Yeah, this is like, there was just no resale value. It's like people trying to get rid of VHS tapes now. Will it ever come back around so that they're worth something? I don't know. But just people they couldn't get rid of them quick enough. Stores couldn't get rid of them quick enough.
How about 8-tracks that you've been trying to get for the longest time, still haven't, but hope to get one day?
One of the I'm going to call it one of my white whales, and it does exist, is the first Bon Jovi.
Okay.
There is a Bon Jovi 8-track, folks. I'm not even kidding. So I'd really like to have that one. I'd like to get all the Kiss ones. I've got all the way up through The Elder. I need Creatures of the Night, Lick It Up, and Animalize. I'd love to get find the first two Vandenberg albums. I'm a huge fan of that band.
Okay.
Night Ranger's Dawn Patrol, I'd really like to find. Boy, I've done really well finding Dokken, Under Lock and Key. That's the only Dokken one. The Rat EP and invasion of your privacy. And this gets to what I'm talking about, because there doesn't seem to be one for Out of the Cellar, which makes no sense.
Right. That's in the book you mentioned.
Yeah, there are just a
Yeah.
few of them. Like, it's like Sammy Hagar's VOA. There doesn't seem to be one for VOA, even though the one that came out after it is on 8-track. So I would think if you were buying them at the time actively in that format, that'd be really annoying.
Yeah. What's the music from The Elder from Kiss you have?
Yeah, that's a retail cart. That was 1981. So that was a retail cart. And that's not the easiest one to find, but it's not the hardest. Creatures of the Night, I've only ever seen a retail version of that. I've never even seen a club card of it. I'm sure there must have been. But as we know, that wasn't a huge selling album when it first came out. And then Lick It Up and Animalize are strictly Columbia House versions. And that's another thing I talk about in the book. Why did it stop at Animalize when they kept going through 88? You know, why wasn't Asylum or Crazy Nights put out an 8-track? I don't know. And I can't definitively say that they weren't either. That's the thing about it. It's all to the best of my knowledge. I'm not going to put anything in there that's speculative.
And I'm sure you've reached out to some of the big Kiss collectors like Julian Gill and
Yeah, Julian actually
Cicchini
wrote
from Three Sides of the Coin is a big Kiss collector.
Julian actually contributed the Kiss chapter in this book, which was a real thrill.
Yeah, yeah. So what do they have to say about the ones from the 80s?
He had absolutely no interest in 8-tracks.
Okay.
Yep.
See, now I wonder, Mark Cicchini, I watch Three Sides of the Coin a lot, and he's a big collector. I bet you he might have something.
I've never seen him talk about 8-tracks, which I've always kind of wondered why. But again, everybody has their collecting focus, right? Everybody has a focus. Like, to me, I wouldn't be the least bit excited about collecting different figures. But if I thought that I could go somewhere and find one of those 3 titles that don't have 8-track, yeah, I'm excited all of a sudden.
Yeah.
It just depends.
Another piece of cool 8-track trivia is Springsteen's live 75 to 85 box set. And I first heard this on vinyl. My brother-in-law had it. And that's when I became a diehard Bruce fan. That's when I really was like, yeah, I'm in, because I had Born in the USA on cassette and I loved Tunnel of Love. But I was like, oh yeah, this guy's good. In the book, it's noted there's a significance to this box set. Can you talk about that?
It's the only known box set to come out on all 4 formats. Yeah.
All 4.
Yeah, it came out on was 4 records, 2 CDs, and I think it came out on 3 8-tracks. There's a picture of it in here, but yeah, it's pretty weird. And Tunnel of Love came out on 8-track too, by the way.
Okay, do you have it?
Yeah. I'm not a Springsteen guy.
Okay.
But
okay.
But it does exist, yeah.
What are the biggest selling albums on 8-track?
Boy,
just the ones that you would probably figure, like Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. I'm wearing the shirt.
I would imagine, yeah, I would imagine it would just be a percentage of that, right? I mean, Michael Jackson Thriller came out when they were still making retail 8-tracks. It's not the easiest thing to find now, but yeah, I would say it would just be the biggest selling albums, but just a very small percentage of them. And I don't know how Columbia House sales factored in. Because, you talk to a lot of bands and they'll say they didn't make any money off those. And that's why a lot of bands ended up not allowing their music to be distributed that way. Because, when their introductory offer was always 12 albums for a penny or whatever, and 2 more if you can conscript 2 other people to join, it can't have been a lot of money made there.
I know. I used to love that, man. I remember getting so many CDs that I became fans of that band just because I said, what the hell? I mean, you thought there was a trick to it, or maybe there was something. Am I missing something here? But it was really that.
The only trick was if you weren't careful and you didn't send back your selection of the month card if you didn't want it. Then you'd end up having to pay for something you didn't really want. But other than that, if you would, just keep track of that stuff, use your brain. I remember I joined Columbia House in 93, and when I was replacing my cassettes with CDs, man, I cashed in there because they'd have sales on all these old CDs. And I remember getting the first Blue Murder and a bunch of the Whitesnake ones. This is great.
Blue Murder.
And it's funny, up here in Canada, they seem to stop with the 8-tracks in 84 through Columbia House. As far as I know, I've never seen one past 84. I'll show you one of the ones that I have, because it's not that easy to find the Canadian ones, believe it or not. But
Which
Rush
one's?
Grace Under Pressure.
Oh yeah, Rush Grace Under Pressure. Okay. Yeah.
So that's a Canadian version of that. And that's like I said, that's the last year that I know of that they made them in Canada. So it was the same company as the States, but it was a different branch, so a different numbering system. And there were acts up here in Canada that didn't have record deals in the States, that sort of thing. So
Anyone that stands out, like as far as you talked about how sometimes they would rearrange the track listing, any ones that really stand out as like, wow, what the hell?
yeah, there's one that always comes to mind if anybody's a Queen fan. Queen 2 was originally released to be sort of a quasi concept album. It had a light side and a dark side, and the songs are all out of whack on this 8-track. So program 1 is The Loser in the End, The March of the Black Queen. That makes no sense. It's not how this album's supposed to start out. So yeah, some of them are just really, really mangled. Some
Yeah.
of them they tried to keep more or less in order, but it's, like I said, trying to keep those programs the same length and try not to break. They really tried not to break up songs. It's just only because of the timing issues.
Yeah. Well, they did that with 45s too. My college roommate had Don McLean's American Pie, and you had to flip the side over to get to
Well,
the
that's such a
second.
long song, right?
It wrote a long song. Yeah.
I think somebody told me that when they were growing up, their parents had the American Pie album on 8-track, and I think they said American Pie was spread across 3 programs.
Yeah. Yeah. Tim Durling is our guest. He's the author of Unspooled, an adventure in 8-tracks, and another book called Down for the Count, the Y&T Album Review. Here's a segue. How many Y&T 8-tracks do you have? he's going to get them now, folks. Is it going to be a
probably my prized possessions?
Okay.
The first two.
Oh, the first two, which are impossible. I was trying to. You could find them on YouTube to listen to, but you can't get them on Spotify because they're a tiny label.
It was on London, which was like so these ones came in a slipcase. Slipcase had the album art. The 8-track itself doesn't. And there's a section in my book called about naked 8-tracks because these slipcases tended to get thrown away. So you might go to a thrift store, or a garage sale or something, and see a lot of these 8-tracks with no artwork on them and think, are these truck stop tapes? Are they fakes? No, they're not. If they've got a record label on them, it's just that the slipcase got thrown away, just like DVDs or video games or anything would have slipcases. So some labels had both the artwork on the tape itself and the slipcase. In the UK, they did something interesting where the slipcase would have the cover art in color, but the 8-track itself would be in black and white. It just depended. And as far as I know, and this is another weird thing, those are the only Y&T 8-tracks that I know of. But A&M Records were still releasing retail 8-tracks in 81 and 82. You can find Styx and 38 Special and bands like that. So Earthshaker and Black Tiger should exist on 8-track. Either they don't, or they're in such small quantities. But you'd think after this many years of me looking for all things Y&T, I'd have discovered them.
Right.
There's only one other 8-track that I know of that has any Y&T on it, and that is a K-Tel compilation called Masters of Metal that came out in 1983. It's actually a really good mix of songs, and Mean Streak is on it, and that came out on 8-track. So as far as I know, that's the only Y&T song that's available on 8-track under the name Y&T.
Yeah, and there are people that manufacture fake 8-tracks to sell them. So yeah, there is a way to spot if it's a fake 8-track. What are you looking for?
If it looks too perfect, that's the number one thing. If it just looks too smooth, too perfect, too new, too shiny. 8-tracks, inevitably, even if they're kept in the best of shape, you'll see this Queen one. This is a really smooth cover.
Tell us
Okay.
where people can get Unspooled and Adventure in Eight Tracks and down and also Down for the Count and the new book on Kansas. I mean, they're available pretty much everywhere. Amazon.
Yeah, it's through Amazon, wherever your home country is, wherever your home Amazon is. Type in my name, Tim Durling, and the first three things you should see are my books. If you're specifically looking for the Unspooled, type in Unspooled, Tim Durling, Down for the Count, Tim Durling. Right now, when you type in Kansas book, the first two things you get are like road atlases, and the third one is my book. So
Okay.
yeah, all on Amazon. Yeah.
Okay. And where can people find you online and your YouTube channel?
Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I've been doing this for it'll be 10 years at the end of August. And I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, all Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Just look for me there. And I recently just joined TikTok because my wife insisted I join TikTok. So I'm on
All
there
right.
too.
All
Uh,
right. Yeah. You got to cover them all. I do TikTok as well.
yeah, gets a lot
Yeah.
of views. I've learned that
It
when
does.
I post something. Yeah.
It helps. Yeah, so people stay tuned because we're going to have Tim back on to talk about his Y&T book. But for this episode, Tim, thank you. This and congrats on a great book. Great book.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. Thanks for having me on.